Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are talking about the national championship game between Indiana and Miami. It's finally here, folks, the national championship game. Just one more game to go in this college football season, and as you can see, I am dressed for the occasion. I've got my tie on, my official business attire for this matchup. That is how big of an occasion we are talking about, the biggest game of the season. And before we get into it, as always, be sure to like and subscribe. When the season ends next Monday, the content on this channel will not stop. We will continue through the off season. So go ahead and subscribe if you're looking forward to that. And comment down below what you think will happen in this game. Can Miami pull off the upset? Does Indiana do it once again? I would love to hear what you think about this in the comment section down below. And in this game, Miami is of course an 8.5 point underdog at home in Hard Rock Stadium, which means FanDuel has Indiana winning at about 28-20 in this matchup. And overall, these are two very similar teams. Both teams who want to control the pace of this game and hit on their explosive plays. Both teams who have dominated in the trenches throughout this entire season. And both throughout this postseason have had elite quarterback play. Let's go ahead and talk about that matchup between Carson Beck and Fernando Mendoza. For Beck, he gets his flack, definitely can be mistake prone at times, but throughout this postseason absolutely has not been. He's been there when they needed the plays to win these matchups. 67% passing for 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, and just 1 interception throughout this postseason, and a rushing touchdown in their matchup against Ole Miss to send them to this game. Absolutely elite play from Beck so far. And for Mendoza, he has caught his fair share of strays throughout this. He's been touted as the worst statistical Heisman quarterback ever. I think that is downright disrespectful, and to be honest, quite slanderous. Fernando Mendoza has been very good all season long, and most importantly, he has shown up when it has mattered most. He's averaged 200 yards passing per game in this postseason with 4 touchdowns per game. Absolutely been on a heater throughout this postseason, and a big factor in that is how well the offensive line has played, and that's going to be a big factor once again. These are probably the two best offensive and defensive lines in the country, and wouldn't you know, these two teams are in the national championship. It's almost like that is the end-all be-all in this sport, but I digress. Miami has gotten a ton of buzz due to their elite names on both sides of the ball, but Indiana has been flat out dominant throughout this season, even while losing their best defensive lineman in Stephen Daly. There are NFL players sprinkled all over these lines, and that is probably why both of these teams are in this matchup. But with that being said, let's get into the matchup advantages for both of these teams in this game, starting with the quarterback, which I am going to have to go with a push. I know, starting out on a hot streak, Fernando Mendoza is of course the Heisman Trophy winner. He has been so good throughout the seasons, probably played his best ball in the postseason so far. But like Mendoza, Carson Beck has shown just how great he can be when it matters most with the biggest plays of the game. And like we saw in their matchup against Ole Miss, he has shown he can win drives with his arm and with his legs, and helping them on the outside and at running back. For the skill positions, I also have to go with a push here. If I were forced to pick one or the other, I would probably have to go with Miami, just because they have a ton of explosive upside on the perimeter and at running back with Marty Brown, Mark Fletcher, obviously ton of talent to go around the skill positions for Miami. But Indiana is deep. They have 2 really great running backs, multiple elite wide receivers, one emerging as Fernando Mendoza's go-to in the red zone in Charlie Becker, on top of Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper, who have also been very good on the outside, and a great safety blanket of a tight end. 2 great units both ways. That's why I'm pushing there. But for offensive line, I actually have to go with Indiana here. Miami has gotten a ton of the coverage for its offensive line. They have multiple first-round NFL talent on that line, but in their last matchup, they gave up 4 sacks to a team that ranks in the mid-40s, both in sacks per game and sack percentage. That, of course, being Ole Miss. Ole Miss was able to penetrate that line, show Miami some stuff they haven't seen all year, and they were able to heavily affect Carson Beck in that game, which gave them an opportunity to win. But like I said, Carson Beck clutched up. That offense was very elite down the stretch. And as for Indiana, they have been elite all season long, both in pass pro and beyond elite in the ground game. That is the biggest reason they've been so efficient throughout this season and throughout this postseason is their rushing attack, which is spearheaded by that offensive line. Again, two great units. Don't want to discredit Miami, but have to go with Indiana because of how consistent they've been. And as for front seven, I'm going to go the opposite way. I think Miami has the better front seven, although Indiana's is great, like I said, but Miami's has been more disruptive overall than Indiana's, both on the line and at linebacker. They've shown a great mix of blitzes, been able to rush the quarterback with just 4 down rushers, and Indiana's is right there with them. They had a great game against Oregon, had played well all postseason, but they are more efficiency driven. They limit big plays both on the ground and get good pressure on the quarterback, but they are not as disruptive, like I said. Unlike the Indiana secondary, which is going to be the team I go with in that metric. Miami's played solid, a lot better than they did in the regular season in the secondary. Played well against Ole Miss, which really surprised me. I thought with the volume that they had with Trinidad Chambliss and his arguably 5 or 6 wide receivers he could target, that they would crumble a little bit, and that's why I picked Ole Miss to win that game. But they held up very, very nicely. So once again, Miami's secondary isn't bad, but Indiana's has just been the far more disciplined and efficient unit. Rarely give up big plays through the air, which is going to be tested by these Miami wide receivers and this Miami game plan, but we'll get into that later. As for special teams, I have to heavily lean Indiana. They have been way better at hitting field goals, way better at the field positioning game, and way better in kick and punt coverage than Miami has been throughout this postseason. Miami has been very good in the return game at times this year, but Indiana has seen good return games and really hasn't struggled with anything they've seen so far. So for that, heavily leaning Indiana in special teams. And as for coaching, I really wanted to push here, but I have to lean Indiana. Like I've said all postseason, they've had an answer for everything. From a talent mismatch perspective, they shouldn't even be in this game, but they are here, and most of that is due to coaching and coaching philosophy. They've seen great defenses, they've seen great ground attacks, they've seen heavy volume pass attacks, been unfazed throughout that. And once again, all credit to Miami in this department. Shannon Dawson, Corey Heatherman, two of the best coordinators in the sport. Mario Cristobal, proven he is one of the best head coaches in the sport as well. But Indiana, top to bottom, in my opinion, has just been the far more disciplined and dominant team so far this season, both from a coaching and an execution standpoint, which falls on coaching. Those are the matchup advantages in this game, but let's get into some keys to victory in this matchup. For Indiana, just do the same thing you've been doing. Win at the line of scrimmage, win on the ground, avoid third down and long, and you set up a nice rhythm for Fernando Mendoza. On defense, limit Miami possessions. They're going to want to set up explosive plays, and they're not going to be able to if you limit the amount of times they see the field. It is key that you're able to force a turnover in this matchup. Miami has averaged 1 turnover per game this postseason, and they've averaged 2 takeaways for Indiana in this postseason. I'm not a math guy, but that sounds like at least 1 in this game, which will help Indiana. They've been so good at forcing points off turnovers. Absolutely can turn the tide if you force one in this matchup. And likewise, do not make mistakes. Indiana hasn't been a team that makes mistakes all year long, but Miami has been a team that forces them throughout this postseason. In their 3 games, they forced 5 turnovers, and that is absolutely not an option in this matchup. Like Indiana, Miami has been able to generate points off turnovers, and you cannot allow that in this matchup. That absolutely will help them flip the script. And as for Miami, the biggest thing for them in this matchup is disrupt. You can't allow Indiana to run for 4.5 yards on you in this game. You cannot allow Mendoza to get any groove and allow him clean pockets in this matchup. And you have to force third down and long. Indiana's been a rhythm team all year. They've been super dominant on the ground, which leads to very, very high third down conversion rates. And if you want to see the field as an offense and generate explosive plays, you have to get them off the field on third down. And on top of that, like I just said, you have to explode, whether it be setting up Malachi Toney in space. They've had a ton of success with tunnel screens with him throughout this postseason. Or if you're just running the ball with Mark Fletcher, who has been elite in the postseason, to set up shots down the field. That's been the game plan for this offense all season long and now all postseason long. And on top of that, if you succeed on your explosives, you absolutely cannot afford to settle in the red zone. And that is because your field goal kicker, Carter Davis, has not been reliable, unfortunately. 3 for 7 on field goals in these postseason postseason, 2 of 6 on field goals longer than 30 yards. So like I said, you're going to have to make plays inside the red zone, get creative offensively once you get inside the 25. In my opinion, unless it's like 3rd and 15 from your own 30, absolutely should not be a field goal type of game at all. Go for it as much as possible. You're going to need to score touchdowns. Can't trade field goals with touchdowns if you're Miami in this matchup. And just like I said for Indiana, absolutely cannot afford turnovers. Indiana has broken teams based off turnovers. You saw Oregon get absolutely routed by this Indiana team last week due to those turnovers. You saw Alabama give away the ball in that matchup, which they scored off of. That is absolutely game-ending stuff if you give up 2 turnovers in this matchup. Cannot afford to do that if you're Miami here. And with all of that great stuff out of the way, let's get into my prediction. What do I think will happen in this matchup? And for full transparency, just before I get into that, I have picked Miami games 3 times throughout this postseason, and I've been wrong all 3 times. Self-admittedly so, Miami has been apparently a blind spot for me, but Indiana has not. I've picked them correctly twice. I was spot on with Alabama. I picked them to win against Oregon, so you can factor that in to this prediction, how much you trust my opinion on Miami versus how much you trust my opinion on Indiana. For Miami, though, in order to win this matchup, I think they have to hit 3 or more explosive plays. I think Carson Beck has to continue to extend drives however he can. He's been so great at doing that this postseason. You can't allow Indiana to control the tempo, have to get them off the field on 3rd down. And I think even if they succeed on a lot of that, it's going to come down to the last drive for Miami. I think it's either tied or they're trailing, and they're going to have to go down and score either with a field goal, which obviously I said cannot be the last option for you, or with a touchdown in order to win this matchup. And since that is the case, I have to trust Indiana in this matchup. I do think Miami is probably the best team they've seen so far. Definitely the best defense in my opinion. I think they could struggle to run early on, which might force a low scoring first half of football, maybe even a Miami lead going into halftime. But I think down these stretches where they've been the best so far this season, I think they'll be able to wear down this Miami front like you saw Ole Miss do to a relatively successful degree last week. I think once again they have success on 3rd down. I think Mendoza remains consistent because of that. And most importantly, I think Curt Cignetti and his staff absolutely nail the game plan once again like we've seen them do against both Oregon and Alabama so far. I believe this ends up being a closer matchup than Vegas thinks it will be, but ultimately I have Indiana winning the national championship, beating Miami at their home stadium 24-20. And with that, thank you for watching. As always, be sure to like and subscribe. It's been a great season, and I thank you all for tuning in and watching the content. Couldn't have gotten through this season without you guys. So once again, thank you for watching. Have a great national championship viewing experience, and I will see you in the next video.